Very good. Well, welcome everybody to Live from the Archive. My name is Tom. I'm an Engagement Learning Officer here at London Metropolitan Archives, and it's my pleasure this afternoon to spend a little bit of time talking about this map behind me to you. So this is the Richard Horwood map of the 1790s, and we'll be going into a bit of detail about how this map was created, how it was surveyed, and some things it can tell us about 18th century London. But before we do that, just a few more general introduction to the exhibition and some housekeeping. So welcome to those of you who are kind of on site. We've also got some people broadcasting at home, and thank you very much. Simon has just adjusted the camera there. Those of you at home, I do hope you can hear and see us okay. Any issues, just pop that in the chat and my colleague Simon will adjust as we go. And please do say as we go along, we'd much rather fix any issues as they happen than find out afterwards that things weren't right. So anything there, do put it in there. And if you have any questions about what we're talking about this afternoon, please feel free to pop them in the chat. When we finish the main presentation, we'll take questions both from the in-person audience and the audience at home. Really good. So just to say, the Live from the Archive series, it's once a month at the moment, and in this series we're going to spend a little bit of time with one or maybe a handful of items that we have on display in our exhibition. Our current exhibition is Magnificent Maps of London, and as the title suggests, we're looking at the various maps that have been made of the capital over a period of about 500 years. This is sort of a small part of a very large map collection that we hold here at London Metropolitan Archives, and there's some very great treasures on display in this exhibition at the moment, which is currently scheduled to run until October. If you are able to come to the exhibition in person, what you'll see is a mixture of original archival documents that are on display either on the wall or in cases, and digital reproductions or facsimiles, as we tend to call them, as well. We've decided to go for a mix of those two types of sources, and that's because they both have their charms and their advantages. So obviously it's nice to see the original archival content. There's something very special about that. But some of the maps we hold in our collection would be quite challenging to display in their original format. And indeed that's the case with the map that we're looking at today, the Horwood map of the 1790s. As you can see behind me, this is a very large map, and it would be first of all quite difficult, not impossible, but difficult to display it in its original sort of 32 sheet format in the exhibition, and also in doing so we'd lose out on the space that we could show other things as well. So we had to balance the pleasure of showing the originals with some sense of practicality as well, and what you can expect to get from the map as well. So in this case, as I said, we've decided to go with the digital facsimile, and that's what you can see behind me. And as large as this digital facsimile is, it's actually a reduction. So the original Horwood map was printed on 32 sheets, and it was a very big map indeed, so 4 meters by 2 meters. So a large map, as I said, printed over 32 sheets. So large, in fact, that we understand that Richard Horwood, the map maker, had to produce his own paper, and he couldn't get enough paper or paper with the right specifications. So he actually printed his own paper, made his own paper in the process of making this map. So it's a very large map. And what does it show? Well, the Horwood map is an important snapshot of London as I said, in the 1790s, which is in itself a very important commas for the 1740s maps by. If you go, do you know how to do it, or do you need me to do it?
I think I do. I'm trying to. So. That should be fine now.
If I start talking, how is that? So, can people? Sorry about this, people at home. Yeah, poor old Simon's doing a million things at once. So, if I just talked, so there's some sound coming through. Hopefully, those people at home give us a thumbs up that the sound is working properly. I'm confident that it will do, but we'll just need to check. So we've gone from the whole map, haven't we? So we'll start, I remember where we were. So first of all, just to check the sound is working okay.
Oh, I can hear you.
You can hear me, very good. So if we can be heard. So my apologies that we lost the sound. So we didn't miss much. What we were saying was there is a pattern for London map making whereby you have a brave or possibly foolhardy surveyor undertakes a grand plan to survey all of London. That map then is used by its other maps, and then if we're being kind, we might say that becomes a map which other map makers derive their maps from. If we're being a bit less kind and probably a bit more accurate, we might say it's a map that other map makers then plagiarized. And the sad reality was that what would often happen is the brave / foolhardy individual that produced these big sort of genre-defining maps would often put a huge amount of effort and capital and work and labour, and the rewards would sort of fall elsewhere. And as we will hear, that's indeed what happened with Richard Horwood. So the previous map that had covered that was this sort of keystone map, as we might call them, was the John Rock map of the 1740s, incidentally also on display in facsimile form in the exhibition today. And by the 1790s, it was time for an update, and the brave / foolhardy soul that decided to do that was one Richard Horwood. We don't know much about Richard Horwood. We have very kind of scant biographical details of him. We do know that he started his endeavours to survey and make this new map in 1792, and he originally planned it to take just 2 years. That was his projection, and indeed, but the map wasn't ready until 1799, which gives you an idea of the scale of the challenge of doing something like this. So over those 7 years, Richard Horwood variously runs out of money and funding, or he's always sort of trying to scrape by. He approaches various sort of sources of funding, and he tries to get and he has some working capital based on a subscription model. So a map like this would have been produced in sheets. There's 32 sheets in total, and you could pay 5 guineas up front for a sheet, and that would give the map maker some sort of money to work with to go ahead. Part of the reason that it took Horwood so long was the high specification, the ambitious target that he set for himself. So he endeavoured to give an accurate ground plot, so the map could be used for administrative and legal functions. One of the customers he had in mind, as it were, as well as the kind of the gentry and upper classes who would buy a map like this for sort of decorative and kind of cultural, artistic sort of reasons, was people like parish clerks and and legal figures as well. The idea being it could be definitive enough to settle legal disputes. So he surveyed it actually himself to a very high standard, looking for an accurate ground plot, and it also we can get an idea of the level of detail that he was going for if we say that this was the first London map ever to include house numbers. So a tremendous amount of detail went into this map, and if you like, Horwood's eyes were sort of bigger than his stomach, we might say, that there was a real challenge in realising that level of ambition. And then if, Simon, we can have the next scene, which is called Bits at the Bottom, very academic time. Jolly good. Sorry about that. I take full responsibility. I must have set something up wrong when doing it this morning, so we'll get that fixed for next time. Hopefully everyone can hear me again, hear me and see me, and on the screen as well. You should see the dedication at the bottom and a little bit of text and the key as well. So we've heard that Richard Horwood sort of ran out of money as he was going along, and so he had to seek sort of extra financial help, and ultimately that was from the Phoenix Assurance Company, an insurance company. And we can see how an insurance company would be interested in having access to a large, accurate map of London. We also believe, although it's hard to be definitive of, that Richard Horwood had some kind of pre-existing relationship with the Phoenix Assurance Company. He probably did some surveying for them as part of their work. That's something we can infer, but as I say, the details of his life are slightly sketchy, but that's something that we can assume. Although there was an existing relationship between Richard Horwood and the Phoenix Assurance Company, we do know that they asked for 8 of the printing plates to be given as collateral on the loan that they gave Richard Horwood to finish producing the map. So they did make sure that their risk was appropriately hedged for as they were going along. So we can see the dedication on the screen there, and in person you can see it here, and you can also see there's a large explanatory text. Well, it's small text, but there's quite a lot in it, and it's sort of worth a read. Perhaps look it up on the London Picture Archive at home, or if you're like me, you're not sort of don't have too much sense of decorum, you can just sort of sit on the floor and have a read, but as you prefer. And what we see in this is it's somewhere between, I'd say, apologetic and indignant sort of explanation from Richard Horwood about the standard of the mapping, and in particular what he does and doesn't show. So he's being particularly defensive about the fact that he doesn't show the back gardens of people's properties. He as you might imagine, when you're trying to generate funding and sort of excitement for a map like this, you need to make fairly bold claims about what it would do. And that's obviously a bit of a fine line between promising enough that people are interested, but not over-promising to the degree that you end up disappointing your customers. And perhaps he slightly didn't get that balance right, because as I say, in this text here, he's saying that he never promised to do people's back gardens as well. He never promised that degree of accuracy. But if people are sufficiently vexed by the lack of back garden, he will in future editions of the map, he can include it for a reasonable cost, or words to that effect. That sort of level of exasperation, perhaps, does give us a clue to quite how much of his sort of blood, sweat, and tears went into this map for Richard Horwood, and it really kind of consumed his life in sort of 1792 to 1799 when it was being surveyed, and then afterwards he was trying to find various ways to recoup some more capital and funding, and he was on the on the cusp of doing that in 1803, when sadly he died fairly prematurely in his early 40s. He's actually buried in Toxteth in Liverpool, because he was engaged in a similar, although slightly less grand mapping project for Liverpool at that time. So in his explanation, he is sort of being slightly defensive, and there are some omissions of the map. There are the missing back gardens. Another omission is the Tower of London. So Simon, if we could have the slide that says Tower and Docks, and bear with me. So you'll give me the thumbs up when we're ready, I'm sure. Good to go, jolly good. So we're back. So there are a few omissions to this map, and one of the most sort of, obvious perhaps, and again you can see the exasperation of Horwood kind of creeping through, is of the Tower of London. So we can see a white spot where the outline, we have the outline of the tower, and whereas for many buildings he's been able to go into an extraordinary amount of detail on the interior. Indeed, Chelsea Hospital even has individual rooms numbered. For the tower we have a big white space, and it simply says the internal parts not being distinguished, being refused permission to take the survey. So they wouldn't let him in to do his survey, which isn't entirely unreasonable. And at this point the tower was sort of a working military base, an important military base. And in the 1790s, there's also where they're either at war or about to be at war with France. So you can see there might have been some reticence on the part of the tower authorities to let someone survey the interior parts of the tower. But rather than focusing on its sort of omissions and deficiencies, it'd probably be nice to sort of round off our presentation by actually thinking about what it does show and what it does show well, and what it can tell us as sort of historians or people interested in the history of London at this time. Well, this is a particularly interesting moment in London history, because this is a picture of London just before the huge, rapid and profound changes that would overtake London in the 19th century. This is London just before that Georgian and Victorian expansion where sort of modern London would be built. Lots of the things that we perhaps think of as iconic of 19th century London, of Dickensian London, you might say, are absent on this map. We can, first of all, if we just look at the map as a whole, and maybe actually we'll keep this scene for now. But if we think back to the map as the whole, think how small London is compared to London today. How much countryside there is around it. There's a different perception of where London begins and ends. And then some of those defining features of 19th century London are missing too. So I'm thinking really, first of all, of the docks, the enclosed docks that would soon spread, go really from the Tower all the way along the River Thames out towards the east to the sea as the decades and centuries roll by. There are only two enclosed docks on this map, Greenland Dock and, I'm afraid the other one slipped out of my mind, and in total we have only 18 acres of enclosed dock space. You should be able to see it on your screen, but as well you can see the Greenland Dock here. So this is Rotherhithe. You can see Rotherhithe here. This is today's Docklands. Obviously the docks have been and largely gone, now replaced with a different sort of international trade. But this is fields and a few riverside industries here. So you can see that change there. And then the industry of Victorian London, much of it in Bermondsey. Again, Bermondsey is not the Bermondsey we might think of from 19th century London, from Dickens and Mayhew and other people. We have London almost stopping not far south of the Thames, those fields there. And to that, although it won't be on your screen, we might add the East End as well. This what we might think of as that East End corridor between Whitechapel and Commercial Street, again into Stepney, rather than being the kind of the beating heart, bustling heart of East London, is going into fields again as well. So it gives us that sense of change, with the benefit of hindsight of something that's about to happen. It gives us a sense about how it's going to happen. So that's probably quite a nice place to end the main presentation. So maybe if we could go back to, I think, outro scene, that would probably do us. Or if we go back to welcome, we shouldn't have the issue with the sound. So maybe we just go back to that scene. Jolly good. And then I'd be very happy to take any questions that people might have. Either we'll start with the people in the room. That maybe is a bit easier. Do you have any questions that I can answer for you? No, that's fine. That's fine. If they come to you, let me know. And people at home, are there any questions or comments? So we'll just give people a moment to get their fingers into life. Yes.
So I would have one question.
Yes.
Over to the west side.
Yes.
Around Harley Street and Oxford Street.
Yeah.
It's very much a grid pattern of development.
Yes.
And north. And I was just wondering, because the central area is very medieval,
Mm-hmm.
and that is clearly built up in the 18th century, presumably,
Mm-hmm.
that area there. Is there a reason why it's on the grid pattern?
Sure. So I'll just repeat the question just so everyone at home can hear. So the question was, if we look at the city, it's sort of more medieval and sort of a more sort of winding street pattern. But as we go to the west, over here, we see that the streets become more regular, more of a grid pattern. So, and the supposition was that obviously that was developed in the 18th century, the 1700s. So the reason it would have been so is basically we do see throughout the 1700s a westward expansion. Basically, if you have money, people are starting to move away from the kind of the crowdedness of the city, and the let me just sort of remember the process. So there was a lot of sort of speculative building that would take place. You would the landowners would grant a lease of their land for some amount of time for builders to develop on, and then after that lease finished, it would be there. The builders in turn are trying to get as much as they can in a space, hence the more regularity of it, and often arranged around squares, as you can see. So because it was a bit more built to plan, whereas the city grew up a bit more organically, that's why you get that more regular pattern. Thank you. Are there any questions from people at home, Simon?
No, just I wanted to see a close-up of the various areas and adjust them on the map.
Oh, jolly good.
So is there more?
Okay, so we'll give people at home, or any more questions from those of us in the room?
By this time,
Yeah.
Is the city wall started to thin out?
Yes, it has, yeah. So I forget when the wall goes down for good, but it will either be, I think from memory, and this is from memory, it's pretty much all gone by now. I think it's sort of the middle of the 1700s that it all goes, but that's from memory, so I'm very happy to be corrected on that. Can't see much trace of it. It would be about here, wouldn't it? Yeah, so it's pretty much all gone, if not all gone. But there's the few fragments that remain today, of course, but as a kind of a useful entity, yes, it would be gone by now. And Simon, just one last check-in, any questions?
I'll give it a couple of seconds.
We'll give it. Jolly good. So thank you everyone for joining me either in person or at home. We run these events sort of monthly, so we'll be looking at various other maps throughout the next few months. Next time we will be looking at another map that follows on from this. We'll be looking at London about 30 years after this map. But it would be remiss of me not to say that on the 9th of September we are holding an event here at the archives in person, and if you can get to that, we'll be getting out both the original version of the Horwood map and various other original maps as well that we weren't able to include in the exhibition. So if you are vaguely local, that would be a nice thing. That would be a good thing to come to. But if you're not local, then just look out for the next Live from the Archives events, all of which, both the in-person event and live events, can be booked on our Eventbrite page where you found this one. So thank you again for your time this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I look forward to seeing you again.